Hello, everybody. So, what are key strategies for handling high pressure sales tactics? How can you effectively negotiate payment terms that benefits both parties? And how do you leverage market data to strengthen your bargaining position? We will answer these questions and more today. Welcome, everyone, to Master Negotiators Live, episode 15. Please, if you're following us and you're listening to us right now, introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're coming from. So let me introduce my guests. Simon Rycraft has experienced as both a C-level operator and a consultant focused on improving profit and operations across multiple industries. He is a partner at Tenzing, where he oversees the procurement and negotiations practice groups, in addition to running the marketing department. Simon mentors startups through programs at Cambridge University, Draper University, and the Wharton Business School. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Negotiation Hacks. Hello, how are you?
Hey, yeah, good to see you again, Jay, and I appreciate being on.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm back home in Austin, Texas, so central US.
Amazing. And our next guest is Marijn Overvest. Did I say it right?
Yeah, well done. Great.
Perfect. He is the founder of Procurement Tactics. He holds a Master of Science in Business from VU University of Amsterdam and has dedicated his career to impacting the procurement field. He has over a decade of experience in procurement and negotiations, including a significant role within the commercial department of a major global retailer. Through his company, Procurement Tactics, he aims to empower procurement professionals globally. How are you doing, Marijn?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction and thank you for having me here. I'm doing great. I'm based in 40 kilometers from Amsterdam, which is in the Netherlands, a small country in Europe.
It's a great country. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
So today, if you're listening to us, you can win a free copy of Negotiation Hacks by Simon Rycraft, and he has made 5 copies available. You can also win a free procurement course at Procurement Tactics, and there is one available. You can join both of the giveaways by going to masternegotiators.live. So who I am your host, J.N. Raitt. I am an associate professor of management at McGill University, where I specialize in negotiation and conflict resolution. Every week on Master Negotiators Live, I bring in 2 negotiation experts. They come from sales, they come from procurement, management, mediation, arbitration, law enforcement, you name it. Master Negotiators Live is all about the how-to of negotiation. No fluff, just practical advice you can use in your daily work and your daily life. So please, again, type in the chat where you're joining us from. So I have, to you both, prepared a few questions so that we can get to know you. So let's get it started. Maybe, Simon, what got you in our field and what keeps you interested about it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that takes me back a little. Really did start in probably in psychology, studying negotiations at undergrad. Really just opened my eyes. The people side to it and the psychology behind it really got me interested early on. And then obviously as a practitioner in supply chain and then procurement in my early 20s, got to kind of test some of that stuff out and realize how difficult it actually is outside of textbooks to do things real time and the amount of controlling emotion on the other side as well as my own that I hadn't really anticipated, in the late teens. So yeah, that's where it all began. And then it's just been a love affair in constantly learning and just reading and talking to other experts like you guys as well around personal experiences and testing things out. I just think, there's some great, could I say, godfathers in the negotiation field, right? People like Gary Nessner at the FBI. And when you see people of that depth of experience and expertise constantly learning, I think it imparts on you, that you need to be doing the same, right? There's ways that you can improve, day by day, week by week, month by month, for 30 or 40 years, and continue to affect the profession. So that's it for me. But still learning for sure.
And so, by the way, Gary Nosner and people like Paul Nadeau and people like that are actually all going to Negoticon, which will be happening in Prague by the end of the month. And I highly encourage everybody, go check them out, Negoticon, so the negotiation convention. Pretty exciting event. Simon, you did your MBA at the Wharton Business School. How was your experience there?
It was good. It was good. It was the first and last time that I've studied in North America before coming from the UK. So that was it was a great experience, and a lot of fun. I mean, they obviously have negotiation and conflict resolution and persuasion, and every professor and university has their different style. So that gave me insights there, and I've been back there to give guest lectures as well, relatively recently. So it's good, but like I say, the academic lens is one end, right? The law enforcement is one end. The personal experiences is another. I think the real learnings come from absorbing all of that knowledge and those insights and figuring out what works for you. I have more books than I think I've had time to read, and I know you're a bookworm as well, Jay. So just actually recently did an interview with this guy Scott Walker.
Wow!
The UK's Chris Voss, and his book came out in the US only a week or two ago. So there's just constant new content coming out all the time. We can always leverage. But Wharton was a great platform, a great network. But I want to learn more about your approaches and your content as well up at McGill. So we should discuss that in depth.
Absolutely. And so if you hear, by the way, some ASMR noise, it's because I have my puppy on my laps. She's like eating something and it's just right by the microphone, but it's the only way she stays quiet. So I'm just trying to like keep her quiet. If you've been in the past episodes, she's going to start going crazy at some point. Like it's going to happen. But right now, she's quiet. What about you, Marijn? What got you into the field and what keeps you interested about it?
I would say it's partly accidental and partly planned. So I was working as a part-time manager in just a retail store in my city while I was studying. So when I finished my master's, I went working at the headquarters of the large global retailer. And I would say the entry-level job that they offered me was as an analyst to prepare for negotiations.
Right.
From moment one, I fell in love with, I would say, the art of negotiating. Why? Because I would say that there is a combination of, as well, empathy and the personal side, as well as the analytical side, where you have to prepare, where you have to consider strategies, etc., etc.
Right.
So that was my role for the first 2 years. I helped people like Simon and others to negotiate and to prepare for their negotiation. And in the end, after a few years, I was experienced enough to do the negotiations myself. So I conducted them for a couple of years. And a few years ago, I quitted my really nice job at the headquarters of the large global retailer to start upskilling procurement professionals. But that's the way how I ended up in, I would say, the world of negotiations. Yeah.
Right. And so something that always surprises me about most business schools is they don't have a specific department for sales and procurement. Why do you think that is?
It's pretty interesting. What I found out over the last, I would say, 15 years working is that there are more universities and more studies to become a good sales professional rather than to become an excellent procurement professional.
Yeah.
I think that has to do with demand. And if I zoom in a bit, I would say that in general, sales is perceived as a sexy profession, and procurement, although I hate this, but it's true, the perceived procurement perspective is that it might be a bit more of a boring job, which I fully disagree with.
Why though? I mean, if sales is sexy, I mean, they literally work together. It's weird. It's a stereotype.
I fully agree that it's a stereotype. I personally disagree, but if you would interview if you would interview 100 people that are not working in procurement and sales, the average person will say that if they have to make a career move, they rather start in sales than in procurement.
So negotiation in my faculty is part of the organizational behavior unit.
Great.
And organizational behavior, the stereotype against it is that it's useless. And what's really funny is there was actually at MIT, they did a study on graduates. Yeah. And they were asking them while they were doing the program, what are the most important courses? And then OBE was kind of like by the end. And then they asked them again 10 years later, what was the most important course? And then OB was like one of the top ones, because they realized by that point that to be promoted is not just about your niche, it's about how you navigate kind of like the organizational life, including how you negotiate. So, I feel like, and it's a very, very hard, by the way, I've been in that field for 12, 15 years now, and it's really hard to break that. It's been the constant problem with it. So, but you have actually, a procurement tactics. And so can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so basically what we do with our company is that we upskill procurement individuals and I would say procurement teams from all over the world to become better versions of themselves. So, of course, one of the most important skills for any procurement professional is to negotiate, but we take it a bit broader. So we also upskill procurement teams on sustainable procurement, on how to use ChatGPT and AI, of course, in negotiations, but in the total procurement process. And we do that via online courses.
That's amazing. And so can you tell us maybe, Simon, what your company does? So Tenzing.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know I'd get an opportunity to pitch, so you can test out the
No, it's just so everybody can know what it is.
Oh, for sure. No, so we're a trusted alternate to traditional consulting. We're a platform of experts, or a platform of know-how powered by experts. We have 1,400 experts globally, average tenure of 26 years of experience. The majority of our experts are practitioners, so come with a lot of background experience. Company started 22 years ago by Tom McLeod and Bill Angelini. They'd helped scale a reverse auction company called Free Markets that some of the people listening may remember through to IPO. They also worked together at a strategy firm, same firm that I was at, and they left and decided to set up their own firm and think about how can we do things a little differently. And fast forward 22 years later, we subcontract and partner with top strategy firms around the world. We do a ton of business in private equity because they really see the value of actual know-how and experience from experts. We get involved in everything external that you would expect from buyers and clients in supply chain and procurement and negotiations and sales and finance, etc. We do our interim executive placements as well as kind of consulting and short-term advisory work, mainly because the pool of experts that we have in our network are able to do both, right? They've had P&L responsibility, they've managed large teams, so they can do interim placements, at the C or C-1 level. So that's us in a nutshell. Obviously, reach out if you'd like to learn more. But negotiations has been a discipline and a practice for us for a while. It's often something that clients need support on, and they don't necessarily want companies to come in and take over the end-to-end process. But having people to come in and coach large commercial as well as procurement and buying and supply chain negotiations, and then also be there kind of behind the scenes to guide and help with execution to maximize the value from those events and those activities. One thing I love about what we do is we'll be doing a joint venture negotiation advisory piece of work for one client, and we bring in someone who knows, has been doing joint ventures in the automotive industry or aerospace and defense for 20 years, right? Just the insight that you can get from that person, you can't find online. AI is not there just yet. So there's a lot of know-how that you can tap into if you find those people. And that's what we specialize in.
That's amazing. So you basically, if I understand correctly, you make the market more fluid. Like you connect people, you bring the knowledge. Do you feel that, so quick question. Why do you think negotiation is not a more popular topic? Why is it such a niche topic where in reality it shouldn't be?
I think it's popular from a personal interest perspective. I think everyone enjoys it. Some people are better at it than others, and the ones that aren't as good at it aren't necessarily less naturally inclined. They just haven't had as much experience and spent enough time practicing and studying up on it, so they kind of stay at that same level of performance or output. So I think that, back to your point, the lower popularity perhaps is in the education field. I mean, it's always a sub-topic at most universities around the world. It's not a core discipline, a core course, and that, I think, is missing out, absolutely. But I think it's growing. I mean, what law enforcement's done more than anything is help to popularize, right? The stories that they bring in just give it a whole different angle. It's allowed a lot of us outside of law enforcement currently, at least anyway, to get in front of people, to have those conversations and apply it in a more of a commercial angle. So I think we're all helping each other to uplift I could call it a profession. I think it is a profession and discipline. But like with everything in science, because there is a lot of neuroscience and psychology, which is the science discipline in the background, there's still a lot more that we need to learn about how the brain works and how it operates in different situations, and how do we apply that in a negotiation setting. So we've come a long way in the last 20 years from what I've seen, but we still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, something that really struck me about negotiation when I started teaching it, and something that really keeps me interested in it, is that you can talk to 100 people, like you were saying, Marijn. You can talk to 100 people, and all of them, not one, will tell you that negotiation skills are useless. Everybody will tell you, it's useful. You can get better deals. You can resolve your conflicts, all that stuff. And then you ask them, but do you do it? And they're like, no, I don't do it. And so I think, we can thank people like Chris Voss, we can thank people like that who've been kind of like popularizing it, but they're really related to like the true crime interest of a lot of people. And so the question is, how do we make it popular without being true crime? Like, how do we make business negotiation popular?
Mm-hmm.
Marijn, what do you think? How do you make a topic like that popular? How do you keep people interested?
I think that we should aim for, I would say, the most positive approach. What I found out in my life so far, and you also mentioned that just now, that people sometimes can, I would say, experience feelings of stress while preparing for a negotiation or while being in a negotiation. Yes, that's true, and that might be even the case if you negotiate for 20 years. I have been negotiating for such a long period in my work life now, and sometimes it still gives me feelings of stress, but that's not I would say that is not the problem. I think that we should mainly focus on the positive outcomes for either yourself as a person or for the company that you are negotiating with. And that does not mean a negotiation does not mean that will always lead to a clash. No, a negotiation can also be in a very positive experience, in a positive sphere and atmosphere. So I think we should focus more on the positive outcomes rather than the stress that it can, I would say, that it can affect people in that sense.
Right. And so as a follow-up question I have for you, Marijn, if somebody was coming to you and said, I have a negotiation in 5 minutes, what's your number one tip to help me out? What would it be?
I would say that depending on the interdependence, I would say start extreme. Because if you're not prepared, my main tip would always be do not start your negotiation if you did not prepare well. But if you have to start it in 5 minutes, start extreme to buy yourself some time. But of course, you need to make sure that the interdependence is there, because if there's no interdependence, the people will probably just leave the room and tell you, you have a crazy offer.
Yeah, and so I guess your advice is twofold, right? Like the first advice is don't do it, don't start a negotiation in 5 minutes. But the second one is if you really have to, like, be ambitious, right? Be like, don't undermine yourself, don't undersell yourself, or undermine your position. That's really great advice. Thank you. Simon, what about you? What would you say as a piece of advice to somebody who's negotiating in 5 minutes?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, even if 5 minutes is actually a huge amount of time, thanks to thanks to the online world, I think I completely agree with Marijn. I would question whether it needs to start. Time pressure is a tactic on its own, right? So are they saying it needs to start in 5 minutes? Did they set the agenda? I'm going to say they. I'm talking about the other party. Other things that you could do, just say, look, I apologize. I wanted to bring in some other people into this conversation. They're no longer available. Is it okay for us to reschedule? I think that, if you've prepared and you've got negotiation in 5 minutes, I would say things like doing some breathing practices to kind of relax, lower cortisol, and your nervous system, and make sure that you're in control. You know how you're going to open up. I think if you haven't prepared, I'd ask them questions around, are you ready? And things like, do you know what your negotiation strategy is? Who's going to be in the room? Have you chatted with them before? What's the outcome you're trying to get? What's the follow-on from this, and stuff like that. So if they don't know if they've prepared, or if they think they're prepared but they haven't prepared enough, I would get to that by asking them a certain amount of questions of things that they should have readily available. And if they answer all of that correctly, it looks like they're ready to go. I would just work on getting them composed emotionally before that kicks off. But yeah, it's just the time pressure is a tactic, and it's used on on many occasions. And there are things that you can do to back out of that and take back control. Even 5 minutes is enough time. So,
no, that's a really great point. And I have to say, last year I was providing training for a professional organization in Quebec, and so I don't really want to say which one it is, but it's in the medical field. And there was this issue where they would all tell me, my boss just basically shows up one morning and tells me, we're negotiating we're talking about your improvement or whatever. We're talking about your salary in 20 minutes. So show up to my office. And they would show up, but they would not be prepared because they didn't know there was a performance review or anything. And so I was always asking them, like, why don't you say no? Like, why don't you just say, no, I can't, because I need to be prepared and review my statistics. So maybe we can meet next week, right? But many of them would just show up. Like, you tell them to show up in an office in 20 minutes to discuss performance reviews, like, they do it. And so I think I really agree with you that it is a tactic. You prefer for the employee, which I think is very unhealthy, but you prefer for the employee to show up unprepared so that they can't just, counter your arguments. Have you seen that as well, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Sometimes it's not intentional, right? Someone might call a meeting, could be deemed last minute, but they could have been thinking about it for a long period of time. It just hadn't been communicated. It's not always. I think transparency is huge. So for anyone in that situation, I would have that open conversation. Just say, is there any way that we could do this in a couple of days? There's some areas I've been thinking about. I wanted to bring up to you. I've been thinking about it for a few weeks. I haven't noted them down. I think it would actually make the conversation very productive. Are you okay with that? Right. So yeah, things again that they could do to take back control of that time pressure, and the anxiety and the stress that might come from being told you have to join a last minute meeting with your boss, right, when you haven't prepared, could actually have even more of a negative impact on how they react to certain things that are discussed during that session. Way beyond the lack of preparation is, are they emotionally in the right state to fight back? I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that have said things that they didn't think they should have said, right, because they're under a situation, they're in fight or flight, that have had a detrimental impact on a long period of their career, or potentially with that employer. So yeah, so many different ways to handle that. But one of the biggest challenges or stresses I do think that comes from those types of situations are when it's personal, right?
Right.
I am one of the most prepared negotiators out there if it's commercial. If it's something personal, right? If it involves a family member, I'm not the best at all, and I try to improve. But taking emotion out of it, depending on the situation, makes it a lot more tough. Which I think when it comes to salary and or your own organization, or some hierarchy within a business in which you operate, makes it much more challenging for sure.
There is, in French, we have a saying that is "les cordonniers sont les plus mal chaussés," which means that people who repair shoes always have the worst shoes. So basically, if you make shoes, like your shoes are always terrible.
I love it.
And so I think it's a little bit like what you're saying, which is you can be an expert in one thing. It doesn't mean it's going to translate into every single aspect of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really find this interesting. I know it's something I struggle with as well, because when it's close to me, I can have more emotions. If it's just about business, it's a lot easier for me to be detached. Kind of like the same way that for a lot of people, there's been research about how it's so much easier to give advice to other people about their life than to give advice to yourself and actually follow it. Because other people, the situation is simpler. It's more abstract. It's more distant. So you can see it a little bit. You can see the forest for the trees. When it's yourself, it's really harder, because you have all sorts of baggage and thoughts and emotions and all that stuff. So it's a little bit harder. Have you noticed that as well, Marijn?
Yeah. I rather negotiate a 500 million contract than negotiate with my wife about if we go to Italy or to France. So just of course, I'm over exaggerating a bit here, but I fully agree with as well Simon, and as well with you, JM, because without emotions, it's easier to negotiate. I would say that's the main conclusion there. Yeah.
Whenever I see people who don't know me very well and we go to a restaurant, they always say stuff like, "Please don't negotiate the bill," or things like that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to pay the required price. I'm not going to negotiate the bill. But I know some people, by the way, in our community who do. They negotiate everything. And I feel like they really have it's almost like a superpower for them. It's almost like this thing they can just apply to every aspect. But I don't do that. I think I still have issues in my personal life with negotiation. Okay, and by the way, so Jan Mexo, who is the organizer of Negoticon, is in the chat. He's posted a bunch of things, and he actually said last year on my previous podcast, he said something that actually was really great about the number one negotiation tip. His tip was to smile. He says it's because it costs nothing and it can bring you a lot. And I feel like in a lot of negotiations, if you show up with a smile, commercial $500 million negotiations, maybe that's not going to be enough, but interpersonal conflict management, if you show up with a smile, it can go a long way. And so it just stuck with me because I had never heard that, but I agree. I think it's a good tip.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so first of all, I want to ask you guys, and so Marijn, maybe you can go first, which is, how do you handle high pressure sales tactics during negotiations? So people who want you to sign right away, people who are putting deadlines on you, putting pressure on you.
Yeah. So in general, what my main reaction will be while under pressure is asking questions back,
right,
over and over again, to make sure that I fully understand the total picture of the negotiation, and to fully understand where certain behavior of, and let's take a sales professional as an example, where the behavior of the sales professional is coming from. Right. What I learned of all these years of negotiations is that what people say is such a small amount of what they actually mean or what they actually want. Yeah. And the more questions you ask them back to get a deeper understanding of where their behavior is coming from, helps to get out, I would say, the maybe bit negative angle or the challenge or the pressure. So my tip in a few words will be ask questions back, because to find out what is under the surface. If you find out that, the chances of let's say that the challenges and the pressure will go away are quite high.
So for example, if somebody is trying to push you with a tight deadline, you would try to understand why that is?
First of all, try to understand why, because I did both, and I would say that I adjusted my negotiation style based on the behavior of my sales negotiation counterpart. So people that were really pressuring me, first I asked questions to fully understand what's underneath the surface. If that would not help to, I would say, lighten the conversation, I would adjust my negotiation style and push back with exactly the same force. Because some negotiators, I would say, they don't follow the logic of reason, but some people need to have a mirror to look back on their own, I would say, at their own behavior to get things done. So my number one response will always try with logic. If that doesn't work, I would counter by challenging back.
Okay, so it's really interesting because I feel like you have two great points. So one is what we call positions versus interests, right? If they're telling you, I need you to sign by the end of the week, it could be for a variety of reasons. Like it's because maybe he's like finishing his semester. Maybe it's because he's worried you're going to go, or she's worried, they're worried you're going to go with somebody else. So that's the interest, right? Like the position is next week. And so you're trying to understand what is it trying to satisfy, to sign by next week or this week. Is it because, and so then you can guarantee, you can talk to them about the underlying need. And the second one that I thought was really interesting is when people, you would want to be collaborative, right, with people in a negotiation. But if they're competitive, being collaborative can actually hurt you. And the best option for you would probably be to be competitive as well, right?
Yes.
So if they're very aggressive and they don't want to give you what you want and they just think about their own needs, well, you have to do that as well. Because if you're collaborative, more likely, you'll end up with a below par need. So that's really good. That's a really great answer. Thank you so much.
And
go for it.
Yeah, thanks.
No, amazing. And Simon, do you have an opinion on how to handle pressure tactics from salespeople?
Yes. So a chapter in my book is called Behind the Mask. And just a disclaimer, I did come up with that title pre-pandemic. It obviously takes on a very different meaning now, but but Behind the Mask, in a summary fashion is, there's personal needs behind every corporate deal, and different layers, right? So I think unbundling those layers is critical. Sometimes you have to earn the right in order to be able to get that level of insight, right? Just asking a salesperson, what are your needs? Why are you asking for this, right? When you've just met, right? That trust connection goes both ways. You have to earn the right in order to form it. Just because you're a buyer, so to speak, right? If that question was targeted more as one for procurement people, but if you're a buyer, just because you've got the budget to spend doesn't necessarily give you the right to be able to ask that question, or at least the right to get a honest answer back, right? So you have to approach it, from my perspective, with empathy. Like, you actually truly want to build trust and a relationship with that sales or that corporate person, just in the same way they're trying to with you. And if you approach it with a transparent, authentic, empathetic lens, you'll actually accelerate the outcome in a more of a win-win approach for both you as well as the salesperson, right? Where there's a better outcome, there's a better relationship that goes way beyond that single transaction, based on your specific needs. And there are ways to do that and accelerate that as well. But yeah, so I don't think it's a single question answer.
No,
it's who you're talking to, the situation, whether there's. I feel a little bit, if you've seen that video recording of Jordan Peterson, where it's kind of been shared around the internet globally and almost has gone a little viral, where he unpicks. Someone asked him a question, and he goes, "Well, it depends, right? It depends on how you ask the question and the words in the question, and let's go back behind each word." So I always feel a bit like him every time someone asks me one particular question like that. but it really does depend. And I think one thing is we maybe this comes from the law enforcement approach, right? Is we treat the sales and procurement a bit like the hostage negotiation, right? Where there isn't the opportunity to truly create empathy. There isn't a long-term goal. It's just transactional of save life, high pressure, high risk. Most of the time, a corporate transaction is something that shouldn't be approached like that. It should be a lot more of an open discussion and debate. And I think once you share that approach with a salesperson and say, look, this is the way that I approach these conversations. I want to learn more about you. I want to see if we can get to some middle ground. You'll be able to start unpeeling those layers. They'll let their guard down, and it's a much more enjoyable conversation after. And I was in procurement and supply chain for many years. I was consulting in that area, and then I flipped over to the commercial side, and now we ultimately I end up having conversations in both those arenas. So it really humbles you, is the right way to put it, once you've been on both sides. I'm sure, Marijn, right, you set up your own practice, you're selling right now. Yeah. You're suddenly starting to see it from the other side. And I think, JN, I'm sure you're teaching to audiences that will ultimately go into professions on both those sides, as well as advising corporate clients that sit in sales or otherwise. So these are all just really healthy debates. But I think, in summary, it's about everyone, this is a people, human first, as a colleague of mine says, approach, as is everything in corporate and commercial. And there are ways that you can get to that human connection a lot faster that helps everyone else out.
So something that really struck me meeting negotiators from all sorts of industries is, even in law enforcement, their focus is on empathy. And you wouldn't think, right? You would think, because when you watch movies from hostage negotiators, it always sounds like some sort of a mind game or battle of the wits, something like that. But if you look at how they really do it in practice, they're trying to understand the perspective of the hostage taker. And I feel like it's a lesson that really works. There's few things that work for all fields of negotiation or all subfields of negotiation, but that's one of them, which is try to understand the perspective of the other party.
And that's thanks to Gary. I mean, I don't want to, he's very humble, right? And he doesn't
right.
He's the least confident, arrogant person in the field because of what he's had to go through, and he's, through experience. But it's thanks to him. He set up the crisis negotiation unit at the FBI. He built that training, set up the center, and Chris Voss was one of the early students that went through that program that spits out, Split the Difference, the book, which has just been a worldwide success.
Wow.
If you know of Chris and you've read his book, but you've never heard of Gary Nesser, I say, read his material. He's got a Netflix show on the Waco disaster, which ironically is only a couple of hours north of me now in Austin, Texas. But he's the original, right? There's a lot of people, law enforcement around the world, come to train, based on those principles. And, they're constantly this is what I love about it. They're constantly meeting. Even people that got 20, 30 years experience, having these global conferences to talk about what they've learned and the latest evolutions in psychology and neuroscience and how to best apply that in those situations. I mean, I love that level of collaboration. And, people like yourself, JN, are starting to do that more on the corporate side, right? Let's all get together and have these conversations. And we used to go to conferences and do it, behind closed doors. Now we just have the opportunity to do this, live.
Isn't it amazing? Like, that's so cool that we can just connect on a website and then start talking and just organize a lunch and learn. I think it's great. I think it's so cool that we have the technology, and AI has been also very useful to give us ideas and help us prepare these shows and all that stuff. So let's switch to the second segment, which is called Master Negotiators Tactic. And so in this segment, we focus on practical role playing. So the goal is to basically share what you would say in these situations. So I'll present you with specific negotiation scenarios, and you just have to pretend like you're negotiating with me and say what you would say. It's all about demonstrating negotiation tactics in action. And if you're in the chat, you can participate as well and tell us what you think. So let me put on my screen And of course, it's not the right way, but there it is. Okay, perfect. So the first scenario that I wrote is called negotiate extended payment terms with a vendor due to temporary cash flow challenge. So Marijn, how would you do that? Let's just imagine your company is having, or a company is having a temporary cash flow problem. And so you need to have some sort of a payment plan. What would you say in that situation?
I would say that I would, let's say, combine two variables here in the negotiation, and that's the amount of days after the vendor pays.
Right.
The other one is the discount that I would potentially provide him with if he pays earlier. So take the example that let's say that my current payment terms are 30 days and without any discount. I would say that I would call the vendor either to pay earlier with a discount or either to turn it around, because it's extended payment terms. Yeah, so it's from my perspective, I want to pay later. Then I would say, okay, if it's okay that I pay you, let's say, after 60 days instead of after 30, I will grant you with a discount in percentage. So I would couple those two.
Okay.
And regardless of what I would give away more discount to get the money earlier or to pay later. Yeah.
Right. So some sort of an incentive, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because this question, I thought about it because I received actually my gas bill and they were like telling me, oh, if you ever have, payment problems, they had a little leaflet. If you ever had like cash flow problems, don't let the problem get worse, like reach out, so we can help you out. And I thought it was interesting because the reason they're doing that is probably because people don't really want to do that. Like they just let the problem get worse and worse.
Yeah.
And they don't really think about, let's call the utility company and negotiate a payment plan. And so I was wondering always, why is that? Do you know why that is, Simon? Do you think it's true, for example, first, that people maybe have an issue calling and talking about a payment plan?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you get deep into the psychology and the subconscious, right? A lot of the times people hesitate from paying because they remember a negative experience they had before when they weren't able to pay for something versus the actual situation, right? Like growing up, they didn't have the money to pay for something, and it was an extremely stressful situation. The girl or the guy they were taking out for a date, their card got declined, right? And that sits in your subconscious, and 20, 30 years later, if you've never sat down and cleared that, is the reason that you delay paying your gas bill when you were in your mid-40s. I mean, it's amazing, right? So I just think, I think with the payment terms piece here as well, and I've done work with CFOs around this in the past, and there are, this is this kind of question of like, how do again I'm gonna try not to become Jordan Peterson, but it depends on how you unpack the question and the situation in which the question is posed, right? So for most companies, you may want to go out and extend payment terms, but you also need to do some preparation. Right, like, have you actually paid that client you're about to negotiate? Have you actually paid them on time in the past? Right, like go into your ERP system and then determine what's your paid on time been for that supplier as well as all the other suppliers. Because the worst thing that you want to do if you haven't prepared is you go into that room saying you want to extend payment terms. They're like, sure, 60 days would be great. 30 days in the contract, you haven't paid us faster than 80 in the last 2 years. And why didn't I know that? Right? A lot of the times they know that type of insight, so you can prepare to avoid that conversation, and you have it with the right supplier at the right time. But there are also, from a finance perspective, considerations around cost of capital, right? So you may get a short-term discount or a short-term extension of payment terms with a small supplier. But if their cost of capital is significantly higher, right, and they're having to take out an extended loan to cover the purchase order that they're, that you're not going to pay against, they're going to have to get that back at some point in time, right? And you may not know how they get that back. And it could just be a price increase next year. It could just be in the fact that they're giving you lower quality service or product versus the other companies that pay better. But, if it's not a one-off transaction, there is a longer-term relationship to consider. And there are bigger suppliers that may be bigger than you are, whose cost of capital is a lot lower. So should you extend the payment terms even longer with them, right? People that you've paid on time on a regular basis, versus the smaller suppliers where it may hurt them more and they'll need to come back. So that modeling, or kind of, I hate to use a consulting term, but that kind of optimizing of the ask across all of your suppliers and your supply base using facts before you then go and communicate and have those conversations will ensure you have a much more successful, broader, days payable outstanding, right? Which is the metric that the CFOs care about from a working capital perspective, a much more overall successful outcome versus a one-to-one supplier conversation with the exact same ask that will be successful in some situations and not in others, right? There are ways you can ensure that you get a better outcome without just chancing it. And there are large companies around the world that do this on a regular basis and have pressure, and this is a tactic, but very few of them actually properly prepare. So it's a loaded question, but an important one for sure.
No, that's a really good, actually, that's a really good piece of advice, because it's true, right? That if you already have a track record of not paying on time, then by having this conversation, all you're doing is opening the door for a very broad conversation on why you're not paying on time and like what's going on with you. And they probably have a lot of arguments, to say that they need to be paid on time. If it's a one-time thing for a specific reason, it's probably easier. But I assume at the end of the day, the company needs to know what's going to happen. I think that's really what it is. Like they want to know what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and negotiate with you about it. But yeah, I'm assuming it's tougher when you never pay on time.
Yeah, well, some companies literally do. They have a cash crunch, right? Or they've got a new target, new owner, and they send out a letter to all their suppliers. We need to extend you, and then they just cross their fingers and say, "I hope that we'll hit the target." Right? It's a fast way to hope that you're going to get the outcome that you need, but it doesn't ensure success. And cash flow, at least from a payments term perspective, is the days payable outstanding, which is one metric. Working capital has three, right? So you're only looking at one. So if the ultimate reason for even having this type of conversation is because the CFO wants to improve cash flow, right? Then from a working capital perspective, there's there's days of inventory outstanding, there's days of sales outstanding, as well as days of payable. So you should, in theory, right, depending on what your goal is, be looking at all three and saying, do we need to reduce the amount of inventory we have locked up, right? Do we want to tighten the terms that we have with our clients and customers? Maybe our biggest client out there is available to, or is open to changing terms, right? Versus just going to the supply base. It should be, again, back to the procurement versus sales and commercial, not necessarily working together. It should be a joint conversation where everyone determines the best approach to getting that end goal of improving working capital, versus it just being, a procurement thing that is done across the whole supply base.
Absolutely. So let's go to the next scenario. So the next scenario is negotiate with a long-standing supplier who has just raised their prices due to increased raw material costs. That's a very common scenario that people might be faced with, whether they're a freelancer and they're buying materials, or they're a big company and they're buying materials. So Marijn, how would you deal with that?
So my first response from a legal perspective would always be to say no to it and tell them that the contract will start, let's say, by the 1st of May, so that in the negotiation about the new contract, we will talk about the new prices for the new contract. So from a legal perspective, always first say no and decline it.
Right.
And then afterwards, and this is actually a situation where many sales and procurement professionals found themselves in, because if the period of COVID with shortage of raw materials and hyperinflation has learned us one thing, is that prices have been going up. And I would say that in general, I don't know how's that in Canada at the moment, but inflation in the Netherlands over the last couple of years has been 10% plus, a plus 10% plus. And now it's slowing down because the European central banks, they raised the interest rates.
Yeah.
So now it's slowing down, but still inflation is quite a challenge. But in a general way, what we learned from training procurement teams from all over the world is that it was not I would say, if you started in procurement just before COVID, you experienced exciting times. Why? The chances of achieving savings together, working together with your supplier, was almost impossible because prices were going up.
Okay.
What I would say as a tactic to negotiate with a long-standing supplier who just raised their price is that I would always research on, okay, what is the raw material development over the last couple of years and what were the price increases that we paid over the years, to check if those two are aligned. Then, of course, when I would say that from a raw material perspective, it is fair to come up with a price increase, I would always try first to include other variables that I would have want back in the deal to get back out of accepting any price increase. And so that's making, I would say, that's an easy negotiation tactic. Every experienced negotiator will know it. Make everything conditional and always ask as many things back before giving anything away. But then when it comes to a tip for procurement professionals around the world while dealing with price negotiations, especially when we have times like these, is you can also say that, yes, I agree because I see and I acknowledge the fact that prices are going up now, but I do not want to lock those prices for a year, but I want to review after 3 months, and in 3 months we take again into consideration have the prices been going up or down. If they were going down, I want a price decrease, and if not, we have a different conversation again. Because I would say that from a procurement perspective, I see more deals closed at the moment where prices go a bit down than going up. So in that sense, suppliers who from a procurement perspective are asking for a price increase at the moment, in my opinion, it was more likely that prices will go down in the next year. So only accept it for a short period of time, taking into account that most prices might, I would say, slow down or decrease in the next year.
Right. So if I understand your tactic, your strategy would be to really look at this link they're making between the increase in raw prices and the increase in their own price. So you would look at what's the percentage of what you're buying that's actually dependent on raw materials. Because it depends, right? Sometimes it's like 20% of the final price is going to be based on, but sometimes it's like 90%, right? So you don't really have a choice. And then the second thing you would do is you would basically, so if legally you don't have to raise the prices, then you would not accept a raise in price. You would say, you'll just renegotiate when you have more leverage, right? Renegotiate the contract once you have more leverage. And if you have to agree, then you make it temporary to see if the prices maybe are going to go down. Excellent. Thank you. Simon, how would you address this situation?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think back to what I mentioned around payment terms is there are blanket commercial strategies that some companies will put out there, right? They'll go to the sales team and they'll be like, we want to increase prices by X across as many of our customers as physically possible. Go get it done.
Yeah.
Right. So they may be coming to you. Maybe it's how you've been as a customer or a client. It could just be that it's a broad ask. So get to the reason behind the ask, right? Because if it's you, then say, well, rather than increasing prices, tell us why we're expensive from a cost to serve perspective. Like, what are other things that we could do? Giving you forecasts more, further in advance. Lowering the SLAs that we have within the contract. But back to Marijn's point, I think, go back and check the contract, make sure it's the latest agreement. Do they have the option to raise prices without any approval midterm? If they do, then you've got to use some emotional leverage to try and combat that price increase, right? Because if a predecessor or you signed up for the terms and didn't know what the impact would be, is in a contract and they have the opportunity to do it and they're just letting you know, very different situation than if it's not in a contract and they're asking for your help. And get behind the why, right? Get behind the mask and understand the reason for the request. I think that's pretty important. What's also helpful, I've seen, is get advice from an expert, right? And that's not just because I'm part of a team that runs an expert platform, but it's helpful, right? If you're working for the same company for several years, you don't necessarily know what other companies in your same industry are paying, right? So there's some element of information asymmetry that exists in that situation that you want to reduce. There are certain ways to do that if you've got time to plan. Looking at commodity price indexes is helpful sometimes for people that are buying off those indexes. But if that's just one of the sources of costs for your supplier, they could be leveraging forward contracts and buying in bulk where the commodity price isn't a direct reflection of what you're being charged and ultimately what they're paying. So even that in itself could be somewhat of a kind of a magic trick of just like, let's focus on this, that oil and gas prices have gone up and it's really hitting us hard. I mean, that's not always true. If you think about airlines, they'll constantly increase prices and communicate publicly around the the increase in oil and gas costs and having to pass that through to the customers. But if you're a buyer for those types of products, that you're working on 5-10 year forward contracts, which may not have been a good deal for them. So they could just be raising it just in order to improve margin. So a lot of things you should do to research the exact situation. And I would just be transparent and ask the salesperson, you want a bit more insight, get the facts on the contract, like Marijn said, and then react accordingly, I think is the best advice. That's
excellent advice. Thank you. It's interesting because in Canada, so we didn't have or inflation of like 10+% per year, but for a few years we had 7 or 8%. Mm-hmm. And so the Canadian Central Bank did what they did in Europe, and I'm assuming what they did in the US as well, which is to increase the interest rate. Mm-hmm. So now we're back at 2-3%. But increasing the interest rate is tough as well, right? Because now people can't buy housing anymore because it doubled. Mm-hmm. The mortgage payments. So it's really tough. A bunch of people lost their house. I mean, it's really, really tough. Mm-hmm. But I have to say that I know that there is around in Montreal, the people I know, there's this idea that businesses have been taking advantage of that to increase their prices excessively. And I have to say, just going to the supermarket, there are things that are literally twice the price they were like 2 years ago. And you're thinking, it shouldn't have increased by 100%. Like, why are you increasing these prices so much? So, I feel like it's just because now they have a reason for it. Now, everybody knows prices are going up. But I'm assuming it's a mix of both, right?
Yeah. And don't hold back from the research you can do online, right? As well yourself. I mean, just looking at financial statements, prior financial performance, I think is useful. Looking at the general performance across industry, right? Is it that one supplier that's facing that problem, or is everyone, right? Has there been a downhill trajectory of their core kind of income statement metrics, or are they actually relative? I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that are increasing prices and passing that on to the consumer, where their margins have actually been going up in the last few years. So those are key facts you can bring into the conversation to again kind of unbundle and unpeel the reason behind that ask and put a kind of push back to some extent and just say, look, work with me. I'm not seeing the pressure that your organization necessarily is under. I'm going to have a hard time selling this to my CFO when there's nothing that's indicated. So is there something you can give me that tells me specifically that your costs are increasing? And if you're asking all those right questions, you're likely not the one that they're going to put pressure on to increase costs, because 10 of the other customers they went and asked just said yes.
They said yes. Yeah.
researching, right? So and that's what they plan for. They plan for, some kind of conversion success from that request, just like the other companies might do around the request for payment term.
Or just like insurance companies, right? They just deny 100 people and they know that 90% are going to be okay with it. And so now they just have to negotiate with the 10%, that remain. That's a really, really good point. Thank you so much. So I suggest that we switch to the third part of the show. Let me just pull up the slide. And so the third part of the show is called Master Negotiators Q&A. And my dog just found a squeaky toy. So just so you know, she was, okay. So, and she's only interested in the squeaky part, just so you know. She's not going to she's going to make a lot of noise, but we'll see. So Master Negotiators Q&A features seasoned negotiators answering real-world questions from Reddit. So our negotiation experts provide concrete advice on a range of topics, from managing everyday conflicts to mastering complex business negotiations. So today I am joined by two negotiation experts, Simon Rycraft. He has experience as both a C-level operator and a consultant focused on improving profit and operations across multiple industries. He is a partner at Tenzing, where he oversees the procurement and negotiations practice groups, in addition to running the marketing department. And today, if you join the Master Negotiators giveaway, Simon is giving away 5 copies of his book, Negotiation Hacks. So you can join on masternegotiators.live. The giveaway will run until Friday midnight. Simon, can you tell us a little bit about the book Negotiation Hacks? What was your motivation to create it?
Oh, wow. So motivation was actually learning driven. I think I'd read a lot, right? And this is kind of this is a few years ago. I'd read a lot from studying in an academic setting as well as just as a practitioner, and I saw a gap more from my own personal learning perspective, and it was books from law enforcement to commercial books to academic books, and I think I was missing. All of them are great at storytelling. And I don't have any stories in my book on purpose, right? Because I'm like, I could tell some stories, but there's other people out there whose stories are more interesting than mine. And I don't want this to just be about me. What I wanted to do was understand the neuroscience and the psychology behind certain tactics, why things work, why they don't, and leverage some studies in order to kind of present that, but do it in a short form that was easy to study, easy to read, and then go back and reference at a later date. So that's how I came up with the structure, and I learned a lot. Right, I had to do the research in order to understand why certain tactics worked, and it was just it was a useful experience for me. I'm now a lot better at negotiating than I may have been beforehand because I understand more of the why. So I hope that answers the questions. But
it does.
That was the original motivation and the approach that I took, and why it is significantly thinner.
No, but that's great, because I think, sometimes people are intimidated by reading like a 400-page book, that's going to be really dense and hard to understand. But you're really focused on specific hacks that are scientifically proven to really increase your chances of making good deals. Mm-hmm. So that's really what I like about your book. And thank you so much for contributing to the giveaway. I really encourage everybody to join. You have a lot of ways to win. We have a lot of people participating, but with 5 books, right, you have a good shot. So join. And so our second guest is Marijn Overvest. He's the founder of Procurement Tactics. He holds a Master of Science in Business from VU University of Amsterdam and has dedicated his career to impacting the procurement field. And so Marijn is giving away a free procurement course, which is very generous, at Procurement Tactics. Can you tell us, Marijn, what kind of courses do you have at Procurement Tactics?
Yeah, so basically, we believe that there are 4 skills important for any procurement professional now and for any procurement professional in the future. So the first is empathic negotiation design. The second is analytical skills, which means understanding AI and ChatGPT, and making sure that you have your correct procurement strategy in place for next year. The third skill is soft skills, and the fourth skill is know how to, I would say, procure on a more sustainable way.
Right.
So basically, out of this belief, we created over 12 courses, and we are creating 3 courses on a quarterly basis that are, I would say, that upskill procurement professionals on those 4 skills. So I won't highlight all the courses here now, but in general, they are all linked to those 4 skills, which I believe that are important for procurement professionals.
Amazing. Thank you. And quick question for you. I've always been confused about VU University of Amsterdam because I always thought the U stood for university already. So it's almost like V University.
Yeah,
Am I correct?
So V is vrije and U is universiteit. So it's free university.
Yeah. Okay. That's really funny. But I'm assuming that the V University of Amsterdam like sounded a bit weird, right? Like typically
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so.
Several letters. Okay, so let me, and so you're giving away a course. It's like more than $800 of value per course. So I really appreciate it. And I encourage everybody to join, to visit Procurement Tactics, great online courses. So you can do that at your own pace. Okay, let me share my screen and we will do, and the dog is, so just so you know, my dog is here and she is very restless. So, I'm trying to like manage her, but it's not going great. Okay, so the first one that I selected, and so I selected them from 2 subreddits, negotiation, and the other one is procurement. And I wanted to say that these have been reworded because sometimes people are very unclear, they make typos, they're very long-winded. So I reworded them so that they would just really be easy to understand and we could answer them. So the first one, let me share, I didn't share my screen, so I need to share my screen. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is called Looking for Procurement Advice. The person said, and I think it applies for every advice. It's really negotiation in general, but that was in the procurement subreddit. The person says, I still have issues feeling bad for vendors if we move business and delivering that news of going somewhere else, right? I manage so many materials that I can't possibly monitor every single thing. The advice I received previously is that vendors should be always working to stay competitive in the market. So I shouldn't have to bring it to their attention that there's a better offering and I'm moving business, so you should get your prices down. I guess that's what every vendor gets frustrated about. If I move business without giving them the chance to come down. So what do you guys think? Should the person feel bad about changing business or changing providers? Should they have to tell them why that is? It seems like it's something that makes the person feel bad. So maybe Marijn, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I've been in this situation over 100 times.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to the fact that feelings of feeling bad are there.
Wow.
But I would say that it's not needed. But I would say that there are few things are needed. So, for example, always give your current supplier a last chance to counter the price of a competitor which might be lower. I did not do that once, and that was one of my largest mistakes in the first 2 years as a negotiator, because that backfired me since we had a long-lasting relationship with the current supplier.
Right.
So I think that if you give your supplier, which is the current one, always a last chance to give them the opportunity to either continue the business or not, they might feel less bad, and that will might potentially lead that you feel less bad. And then, of course, I think it is fair to explain why you are leaving any current supplier. So from an ethical perspective, I would always do that. Yeah, but not feel bad. That's unnecessary.
Yeah, but I'm assuming also that it's part of a sales tactic to kind of like create a relationship, like an emotional relationship where you feel almost like people are family members or something, or friends, right?
Yeah, true.
Okay, true. Simon, what do you think about that? Like, should the person feel bad? Should they give another shot to the person before switching vendors?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't feel bad about the need to communicate that message, especially if it's something that they they need to do for their own organization, right? But it's like every business has a has a guiding star, right? Public companies, it's shareholders, right? So every decision that's made ultimately builds up to to some goals. It could be private equity owner that setting some targets that you need to adhere to. So no, I mean at the end of the day they're doing their job. I would feel bad though if I personally was not communicating to that supplier, right?
Right.
If previous communication could have actually avoided the situation happening in the first place.
Yeah.
Right, or could have given them a better chance to then come back. I mean, there's switching costs as well, right? That come in.
Yeah.
Just, so maybe suddenly getting that cost reduction, and then you need to look at spend compliance, right? You may change suppliers, but if that supplier is not able to deliver in the way that your internal stakeholders need, they may end up going to the old supplier anyway, circumventing you, so you may not actually deliver the improvement to the bottom line or improving EBITDA in the way that you'd intended. So again, there's a lot of loaded questions to that, but I think transparency at the end of the day is always the best policy. And I think as long as you've done the best job that you can and being transparent with them as soon as you know that you may need to take this route, looking at ways to do it with the incumbent. And looking across not just price, but all the other elements of what you're getting from that supplier, which could be improved with a new supplier, then I think that's fine. Notifying them when they don't have time to rectify it, it's too late.
Yeah.
Doing it based on purely a price change that is a short-term goal that might have a negative impact, I think is short-sighted. So reflect on that. All of my biggest learnings in my career so far, as I'm sure with others, and will continue so in the future, is all about learning from mistakes. So she's doing the right thing. She's doing the right thing by asking the question. But once you've learned how you may do things differently, start putting that into place so that you don't have to feel bad in the future, and you turn almost a lemon into lemonade, right? From learning about this particular situation. So it's a great question.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really interesting question. And I do understand, you kind of understand why this becomes a problem, because from the person, right, who wants to go with lower prices, they're just worried about this kind of like emotional conversation. Maybe they have grown with very strict parents or yelling at them or things like that, and so they can just be thinking, wow, like it's going to be almost like a fight or something. They're going to be very upset. But I can also understand from the vendor's perspective their frustration, right? Because it's really about procedural justice, which is really, people are willing to accept a negative outcome, but the procedure that led to this outcome has to be perceived as fair. And I feel that vendors would feel that not being informed in advance so that they could maybe make a price reduction or explain to you why things are different, they feel that it's not fair. Like, we're working together. You should have told us before moving, to a different vendor. And so it really sounds to me kind of like the best way to do that is really what they say in Getting to Yes, which is separate the people from the issue. You just really discuss the issue, and you can tell people you respect them, you like them, but at the end of the day, your criteria is, the final price and the quality of service, and you found better providers. So can you match them, and we'll stay with you, or maybe you can't, and then we'll move on. But yeah, they shouldn't feel, I understand why they feel bad, and I understand why vendors are frustrated. And I think all of this could be avoided through communication. But yeah, the issue, I would not stop a contract with a vendor without telling them before and giving them a shot.
Do you know what's funny is that for some vendors, this may not be the case here if this person is talking about a particular situation, but some vendors, they'll take a deep breath and sigh of relief. They're like, oh God, you've been such an annoying customer to deal with, and actually we haven't made any money the last 2 years. I just felt bad.
Yeah.
You go, because I've never fired a customer before, right? It's ironic. It's just, and again, you can use this situation to think, are there ways to improve? Like, okay, are there ways I could be better for you that actually help you to stay more competitive from a rate perspective? Is it us, right? Like, let's turn this into a 360-degree feedback review session versus us just being like, we've got to change price because again, the switching costs are sometimes higher than people anticipate.
Yeah.
When they're building a business case for change, right? Cost of updating communication, updating of vendor master database, and working with a new supplier, and the quality risk that might come if they haven't run tests with that new company, and etc. So it's never a clear switch, or at least
And I would add, so excellent advice. And I would add to this that also make sure that the two products are substitutes, like actual substitutes. And I just have this anecdotal thing, like mistake that I made when I took over as a president of a co-owner association, which, by the way, never do. Like it's really like really, you just deal with problems, like that's all you do. But I was kind of like revising all of the contracts, because one of the contracts was the snow removal service, which in Montreal is very important. Like you can't, if you don't have a snow removal company, you can't get out of your garage. Like, so you really need a good snow removal company. And I found one that was literally half of the price of our current provider. And I switched, I informed the current provider. I told him, like, can you lower your price? He refused. But he told me, like, they're not substitutes. Like, you think that they're substitutes, but they're not. I still changed it. It was in 2018. And I stayed with the new provider for 1 year. And then I switched back to the old guy who was like, I told you so. And because basically the new guy, you can write whatever you want on a contract and charge whatever you want. At the end of the day, we need somebody to come several times a day to remove the snow. And if you're not going to be able to do that because you overextended, yourself, and you spread yourself too thin, it's irrelevant how much I'm paying you, because you're not doing the service. So yeah, that was a big mistake of mine. But yeah, that's something I always think about, which is, are things actually substitute? Because cheap comes expensive sometimes. I know it created tons of problems with me, with like owners who would say, I can't go to work. Like, it was before the pandemic. So it was a big problem. All right. So I have a second one. The second one is, what would you do in this negotiation scenario? Our software service supplier increased the renewal cost by 30%, bringing it to 50K. And I'm assuming it's a year. We reduced our user volume by 20% from 9K users, hoping to lower the cost. The supplier justified the increase, citing flat pricing for the past 3 years, inflation, and the absence of price hold or cap in the contract. As a procurement manager, I negotiated to keep the cost flat, but management wanted further decreases due to the reduced volume. During further negotiations, the supplier only reduced the cost by 4K, which I feel is already pretty good. It's like close to 10%. How do you suggest deriving more value in this situation? Any insight would be appreciated. So Simon, maybe do you want to go first? Because I feel I'm asking you a second a few times.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, this is an interesting one, I think. On the SaaS question specifically, right, are you getting much more from that provider, right? I think is the key question. Is there really a ton of advances that might come from an updated contract, or a ton of new releases or whatever? I mean, it's a bit like pharmaceutical costs to some consideration. Most of what they're trying to pay for are delayed costs that they've had to invest in engineering and R&D up front in order to build the product.
Yeah, it's all the failed products, right? Like that's what it is. It's all the failed research that you're funding when one of them works out.
Yeah, and knowing what I know about the revenue and commercial structure of a SaaS organization is, this is generally an account exec or a regional lead, someone who runs the P&L for a particular platform, just trying to increase comp, right? Because they've got a specific target. So there's no commodity prices, right? If anything, the cost of their business is continues to go down, and has seen a lot of pressure actually on margin they've never seen in the past, that's come in the last couple of years. So I would absolutely push back. I would see if there are other things that you could get in exchange. Never give something without some element of reciprocity, because that sets the wrong relationship approach. And just know that they're going after you as well as every customer and client to see which ones are likely to say yes first. So definitely no acceptance. Go back to the contract again, like Marijn said, right? Did you sign up for a license agreement that just blanketly said that price increases can be given, anytime needed, or every quarter, or every end of every year? And know that you are not necessarily you're not in a strong position. Changing out software is generally very tough. It's a lot easier under SaaS, but even with SaaS subscription revenue models, corporate and enterprise programs can be very well embedded into a company. So you may need to accept that price increase, but what it might do is it might trigger you to look at alternate solutions within your tech stack and start investigating those now if you haven't already done so, and try and get contracts with companies that aren't likely to increase it, because these companies showed their cards, right? Is they're going to come to you with a request you didn't anticipate, and if they've done it once, no doubt they'll do it again. So look at the initial, how to react to it initially, but then also look at what that might mean from a category strategy perspective longer term. And work with the CTO and the chief, and the product leads, and the CIOs to determine if there are alternates, and get them involved as well, because a lot of times that budget actually sits in their area of responsibility versus yours. So ask them, is it really worth it? How critical is this software to our overall business? Are you willing to take this increase? Are you not? And then relationships you have where you went to, I don't know, you went to Y Combinator at the same time as as their CEO, or you did an MBA at Stanford or whatever, and you can give them a call and tell their account executive to back off. I mean, there's just so many different things you can do depending on the situation, but it's a common one, right? Because account execs at SaaS firms, as they come in, right, they're a bit of a revolving door. They need to go back in, look at their existing accounts. How can they land and expand? How can they get new clients and new logos? So this type of pressure is actually a regular occurrence for customers out there.
Excellent, thank you. So there are a couple of messages that we've received, and so I'll try to read them. So we have from Per. I hope I say it right. I'm sorry if I don't. I have with success provided the non-awarded supplier with feedback sessions, as the decision is not always only based upon the cost alone. Like having your navigation strategy in place, you of cause has a strategy for feedback. I mean, I guess it's interesting, which is something I haven't thought about before, which is you could provide a feedback session to the non-awarded supplier. And Jan is saying, there's a saying in the Czech Republic, we are not that rich, so we can't, I'm assuming we can't afford cheap products, right? Yeah, you can't, because cheap comes expensive. And Per says another one, and always make it clear that despite coming short on project, doesn't equal that the supplier is seen as a strategic supplier in the future, right? So I'm assuming, right, it's to not give the impression that without them, you wouldn't be able to do that. So Marijn, how would you deal with that situation from that Reddit post?
Now, I would say, first of all, great answer by Simon just now. So there's not really much to add there. But if I look from my perspective at the person that brought this question up, I would compliment him or her, because I think that already it's the negotiation as it's stated is already at quite a good point, because there's no price increase, there's a price decrease, while also having using a bit less of, I would say, volume, but still it's already at quite a good point. And next to the tips that Simon gave, actually I do not have anything to add here.
No, I think that maybe one of the issues here is coming to explain that to management, like really explain to them why already having a 10% decrease or an 8% decrease or whatever after 3 years of no increase is already pretty good. It's already a good outcome. Like, because they're saying deriving more value in this situation. But if they decide not to work with you anymore because you're going too low, like what value are you deriving? So maybe just management. I feel like the issue here is that management is saying, I don't get it. We decreased our number of users by 20%. Why can't we have a decrease by 20% of the price? Like 10% is not enough. But maybe you need to manage their expectations and explain that to them. But I do feel like it's a pretty good deal they already have, like it's not that bad.
No.
Okay, and so one last one. This is more about personal life. But so the person says it's about negotiating work from home days. My husband recently accepted a new role with a hybrid work model, but the company's policy suggests 2-3 days in the office. Given our family situation with 2 young kids and the logistics involved, we're keen on negotiating for a 2-day work from home arrangement. His boss is currently in the office 4 days a week. Any suggestions on how we can approach his new manager to formalize this request? So before I ask you, I just want to say it's actually a situation that I've seen a lot where you have a spouse who's like asking a question because their spouse doesn't want to do it, or their spouse is just too nervous, right? It's sometimes, my husband doesn't want to ask for a raise. Like, how can he ask for a raise? Like that kind of stuff. So maybe that's a little bit of the situation. I'm not sure. Or maybe the spouse is on Reddit, but not their spouse. So what do you guys think? Simon, like, how would you approach this with your manager going from 1 day a week to 2 days a week of work from home?
Yeah, I would understand. There's a lot of things, right? Company to company, it's dependent. I would do my research, right? Is what are the other companies in the industry doing? If all of them are going back to the office, then it's a tougher sell. Like, are all your colleagues accepting 3 days in the office, and you're standing out? Are you pushing for a promotion? How new are you into the job? All these kind of considerations that would determine your leverage. So understand your leverage. Understand a bit more about your boss. Like, why are they going into the office 4 days? Normally, if someone's going to the office 4 days a week, it's because there's an expectation on them that they then have to pass down. So they're setting the example. So by you not coming in, you're making them look bad, right? So are there other ways you could make them look good that reduce the sensitivity of asking for that 1 day off? Don't look at it as a single ask. Go with a list of, if you give me this, right, here are additional things that I could do. Also try and understand some personal flexibility of, well, can you do 3 days in the office, maybe 2 days, 2 weeks a month, or are there certain months where you can do it?
Right.
Can you offer up flexibility to travel, for 5 days, 1 week a month, and then be at 2 days for the rest of the week? So I get just, on a personal level, understand where the real flexibility. Yeah, be creative with that question. But, it depends. Some people, they don't care. There's a lot of other jobs out there and what they do. They've been at that company for a long period of time, should care less. So understand what's at risk for you. Potentially have some backup options. Research what other companies in the industry are doing and the trend. And then determining how important that 1 additional day is for you at home versus the other things that might be at risk by even making that request, and then sit down and have that conversation at a family meeting. And don't avoid using the personal appeal, right?
Yeah.
There's a great lever out there of just saying, look, my wife wants me at home 2 days a week, help me, and here are the additional things that I could do. Maybe the boss will be sympathetic, maybe they won't. But I think if you know the boss well enough, you have a strong enough relationship, you've been creative with the answer, and you're offering other things, then I think the ask will be relatively straightforward. I think if you don't do anything along those lines, and you just go and ask blanketly, you ask for 3, there's no other answer outside of that, then I think the outcome will be a lot less favorable.
Yeah. And I guess also, I really agree with you and everything you've said, but I think something that kind of is missing in the question is, what are other people doing, like your peers, because if everybody's forced to go for 4 days, it's going to be hard, because then, you set a precedent. Why can this guy for just work from 3 days in the office and I have to work for 4 days? And so that could be like a bit of an issue. But I really like your focus on creativity. And it's true. Maybe some weeks you can work 3 days, and then some weeks you can work 4 days. And then you kind of like meet some sort of a middle ground, between various demands in your life, right? Like your wife and your boss, and you find kind of like a middle ground between the two asks. Really like it. Thank you. Marijn, how would you deal with that?
Yeah, based on the exact text that's standing there, you should be able, due to company policy, to achieve what you want here. But no, I think that it's more. So I agree with Simon. If you just go straight into this and ask it, probably the chance will be that you achieve your wanted ideal state. What I can assume that if that's not working, we're currently also hiring many team members here in our Procurement Tactics office. In the end, I would say we have a role which you can do from all over the world. But if you like to build a team, it's important that you see your team members a few times per week. So to tell you my insight here, I tell all the new hired team members of Procurement Tactics, in the long term, you can work from home many times a week. But now, in the beginning, I want to build our team. So I want everyone to be here 4 days a week, and we work 1 day per week from home. Of course, exceptions are there, because I think that especially when you start a new job, it's important to get to know your colleagues, get to know the company culture, etc., etc. Right. And I have a partly remote team working for us in the rest of the world as well. And I found out that it's harder to get to know colleagues and company culture while not seeing each other. Of course. So in that sense, you can always offer to start maybe 4 or 3 days per week in the job, in the office, together with your boss. And maybe after a month or two, you go home working 3 days per week from home. So you can always split that up as well if you don't come to the initial agreement.
That's amazing. Okay, you guys, we're reaching the end of the show. Let me just thank you, really, both of you, for coming on the show. I think this was a very, very insightful session. I learned a lot. I hope people in the audience learned a lot as well. So I just want to remind everybody that learning doesn't stop here. You can go to masternegotiators.live and you can join one of the giveaways. Simon is giving away 5 copies of his book, Negotiation Hacks, and Marijn is giving away a free course from Procurement Tactics. So go join that, and also join us for the next events. All of the next events are currently scheduled, are part of the website. You guys, thank you so much for coming. I'll see you soon. I mean, let's stay in touch.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, JN. Thank you, and good to meet you, man. I did want to ask JN as we wrap up. So, is there going to be a recording of this? How do you do that? Afterwards?
Yeah, so I'll send you. Actually, on the LinkedIn page, there will be the recording of it instead of the banner. They just post the video. But I will send you the links from YouTube and Facebook, and I'll send you the edited version.
So anyone can watch that if they go to the page.
Just to the event page, which is really nice. It's very convenient. Cool. Yeah, because so that the event actually has a life after, like after we go live.
Previously live.
Yeah, exactly. Previously live on Master Negotiators. Yeah, thank you, you guys. I'll see you soon. Be safe. Have a good one.
Okay.
You too. Enjoy.